They said Omega Sienna was mute. They said she was broken, invisible, a ghost in the halls of the Sterling Pack. But silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's survival. On the night of the blood moon feast, amidst the clinking of crystal and the roar of laughter, Sienna didn't use her voice to scream. She used it to command the most dangerous predator in existence. One whisper. 2 words. Don't talk. That was the moment she saved the Alpha King from a poison no one else could smell, and started a war that would burn the kingdom to the ground. Get comfortable. You aren't ready for what happens next. The kitchens of the Sterling estate smelled of rosemary, seared venison, and fear. Sienna Brooks kept her head down, her hands raw from the scalding water in the basin. She was 19, small for a wolf, and possessed a rank so low it barely registered on the pack hierarchy. To the elite wolves upstairs, she was furniture. To the head Omega, Mrs. Gable, she was a nuisance. "Faster, Brooks!" Mrs. Gable barked, slapping a wet towel onto the counter. "King Dominic arrives in the hour. If there is a single smudge on the silver, I will have you sleeping in the kennels with the rogues." Sienna didn't flinch. She simply nodded, grabbing a silver platter and polishing it until her own pale, tired reflection stared back. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken a full sentence in 3 years, not since her parents died in the border skirmishes, and she was demoted to the scullery. Silence was safer. Words got you noticed, and in the Sterling Pack, being noticed usually meant pain. But Sienna had a secret. A curse, really. While other wolves relied on strength or speed, Sienna had a nose that was hypersensitive to the point of agony. She could smell the damp mold in the walls 3 floors up. She could smell the adrenaline spiking in the guards when they lied about their patrol routes. And right now, she could smell the anxiety rolling off Mrs. Gable like waves of sour milk. The Unity Feast, the sous chef, a beta named Kian, muttered as he chopped carrots next to her. "More like the Slaughter Feast. Have you heard? The northern clans are here. One wrong move and Alpha Dominic will tear throats out." Sienna paused. Alpha Dominic Sterling. The stories about him were enough to give grown men nightmares. They called him the Wolf of Winter. Cold. Ruthless. He had taken the throne at 22 after decapitating his own uncle for treason. He didn't tolerate failure. He didn't tolerate weakness. And he certainly wouldn't tolerate the scent Sienna had been picking up all morning. It was faint. So faint she thought she was imagining it. It drifted through the ventilation shafts, a ghostly ribbon of odor that made the hair on her arms stand up. It wasn't food, it wasn't perfume. It smelled like burnt almonds and wet copper. "Sienna, stop daydreaming!" Mrs. Gable's voice cracked like a whip. "Take the wine pitchers to the grand hall. Now. And keep your eyes on the floor. Do not look at the Alpha. Do not breathe near the Alpha." Sienna grabbed the heavy silver pitchers, her knuckles turning white. As she pushed through the swinging doors, leaving the heat of the kitchen for the cool, air-conditioned hallway, the scent hit her harder. Burnt almonds. It was getting stronger. It was coming from the grand hall. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be involved. She was a nobody. But that smell... It tickled a memory in the back of her brain. Something her father, an apothecary, had taught her before he died. Nature doesn't make that smell, Sienna. Only death does. She walked toward the double doors, the sound of the gathering crowd growing louder. Laughter, political posturing, the clinking of glasses. They were celebrating peace, but Sienna's nose told her they were walking into a graveyard. She pushed the doors open. The grand hall was blindingly bright, filled with women in silk gowns and men in tuxedos, their inner wolves prowling just beneath the surface. And there, at the head of the high table, sat the monster himself, Dominic Sterling. He was larger than she imagined, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than her entire life's earnings. He sat with a lethal stillness. His hair was dark, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes. Even from across the room, she could feel the weight of them. They were the color of storm clouds. He looked bored. He looked dangerous. Sienna moved to the side shadows, clutching the wine pitcher. She needed to pour, leave, and disappear. But as she stepped closer to the head table, the smell of burnt almonds spiked. It was suffocating. It wasn't coming from the ventilation anymore. It was coming from the goblet sitting directly in front of the king. The room was a minefield of pheromones. Lust from the visiting she-wolves, hoping to catch the king's eye. Aggression from the northern alphas testing the boundaries. Fear from the servers. Sienna tried to breathe through her mouth, but the metallic tang of the poison coated her tongue. She froze, 5 feet away from the high table. It's in the vintage, she realized with horror. The bottle they opened just for him. A server, a beta she didn't recognize, with slicked-back blonde hair, was currently tilting a crystal decanter over Dominic's goblet. The liquid was a deep, rich red, indistinguishable from any other wine. Visually, it was perfect. Olfactorily, it was a death sentence. Silver ash, a rare, synthesized poison used by hunters. It didn't kill instantly. It paralyzed the wolf from the inside out, locking them in their body while their organs liquefied. Sienna's feet were glued to the lush carpet. If I speak, they'll kill me for interrupting. If I don't speak, he dies. Dominic shifted in his chair. He reached for the goblet. His hand was large, his fingers adorned with the sterling signet ring. "To unity," Dominic said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. The room went silent. Hundreds of guests raised their glasses. Sienna's wolf, usually dormant and beaten down, suddenly snarled in her head. Move. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was instinct. Just as the rim of the glass touched Dominic's lips, a small grey blur shot out from the shadows. Sienna slammed into the table. She didn't have the rank or the strength to tackle an alpha king, so she did the only thing she could. She lunged for the glass. Her hand struck the crystal. Smash! The sound was like a gunshot. Red wine exploded across the white tablecloth, splashing onto Dominic's pristine tuxedo shirt. The goblet shattered against the floor, sending shards skittering across the marble. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. Every guard in the room had their hand on a weapon. The northern alphas stood up, chairs scraping loudly. Dominic didn't move. He sat there, wine dripping from his chin and chest, looking at the small, trembling girl who was now leaning over his table, her hand bleeding from a shard of glass. His eyes were terrifying, void of emotion, pure predator. Dominic started, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried to the back of the hall. Did this Omega just attack me? Guards rushed forward. Get her! Someone shouted. Assassin! 2 massive enforcers grabbed Sienna by her arms, dragging her back. She gasped, the pain in her shoulders blinding. She looked up, locking eyes with Dominic. She saw the rage building, the shift in his irises as his wolf came forward to tear her apart. She had to tell him, but her throat was closed up with fear. She hadn't spoken in years. The words wouldn't form. Kill her, the blonde server, the one who poured the wine, shouted, pointing an accusatory finger. She's a rogue sympathizer. I saw her tampering with the glass. It was a lie, a bold, desperate lie to cover his tracks. Dominic stood up. He towered over everyone. He waved the guards off, stepping around the table toward Sienna. He looked like death incarnate. He reached out, grabbing her chin in a grip of steel, forcing her to look at him. "Give me one reason," Dominic growled, his face inches from hers, "why I shouldn't rip your throat out right here, little mouse." Sienna trembled. She could smell the poison on his shirt. The fumes were making her dizzy. She saw the blonde server reaching into his jacket pocket. For a knife? A gun? She couldn't stutter. She couldn't whisper. She grabbed Dominic's lapel, pulling him down, a move so disrespectful the entire hall gasped. She put her lips right against his ear. "Don't talk," she rasped, her voice unused and gravelly. "Smell the wine on your shirt, not the grapes, the ash." Dominic froze. For a second, she thought he would snap her neck, but Dominic Sterling was not just a brute. He was a master tactician. He didn't pull away. He flared his nostrils, inhaling the scent of the wine soaking his chest. He filtered out the alcohol, the fruit, the detergent, and then he found it. The faint, chemical burn of silver ash. His pupils dilated. His body went rigid as stone. He realized in a split second, "I should be dead." Slowly, Dominic pulled back. He didn't let go of her. His hand moved from her chin to the back of her neck, a protective, possessive grip. He turned his head slowly toward the blonde server. The server was sweating now. The scent of fear coming off the man was pungent. "Beta Kyle," Dominic said, his voice calm. Too calm. His second-in-command stepped forward. "Yes, Alpha." "Lock the doors," Dominic commanded. "No one leaves." "Alpha, the girl—" Kyle started. "The girl," Dominic interrupted, pulling Sienna flush against his chest, covering her shaking body with his massive frame, "is the only reason I am still breathing." He looked down at Sienna, his dark eyes searching hers with a mixture of confusion and intense curiosity. "Hold your breath, Mouse," he whispered to her, and then chaos erupted. The ballroom descended into pandemonium. "Seize the server!" Dominic roared, the command laden with alpha authority that brought half the room to their knees. The blonde server, whose name turned out to be Elias, a mid-level steward, didn't wait to be caught. He pulled a silver dagger from his jacket and lunged not at Dominic, but at the nearest dignitary, the daughter of the Northern Alpha. It was a distraction. "Secure the exits!" Dominic didn't join the fray. He couldn't. He was the target. Instead, he moved with terrifying speed, sweeping Sienna off her feet and carrying her bridal style. "Put me down," Sienna squeaked, the shock finally allowing her voice to work, though it sounded rusty. "Shut up!" Dominic snapped, though there was no heat in it. He kicked open the side door leading to the private corridors, his personal guards flanking him instantly. "Alpha, are you compromised?" His head of security, a scarred wolf named Jax, barked. "The wine was laced with silver ash," Dominic said, striding down the hallway, ignoring the blood dripping from his shirt and the wine staining Sienna's uniform. "Get the medic to my chambers, now. And Jax, if Elias dies before he talks, I will take your head." "Yes, Alpha." Dominic didn't stop until they reached the penthouse floor. He kicked his bedroom door open and dumped Sienna onto the massive velvet sofa. He immediately stripped off his soaked jacket and shirt, throwing them into the fireplace. He stood there, chest heaving, muscles rippling under the golden light of the chandelier. Sienna averted her eyes, staring at the floor. I need to go back to the kitchens. Mrs. Gable will—" "You aren't going anywhere." Dominic paced the room, his energy manic. He poured himself a glass of water from a sealed bottle, sniffed it suspiciously, and downed it. Then he turned on her. He stalked closer, trapping her against the cushions. He placed a hand on either side of her head, leaning down. "Who sent you?" he demanded. Sienna flinched. No one. Don't lie to me. Silver ash is odorless to 90% of wolves. Even I couldn't smell it until it was literally under my nose. How did a scullery maid smell it from across the room? I have a condition, Sienna whispered. Hyperosmia. My senses are overactive. Dominic narrowed his eyes. He leaned in, sniffing her neck. Sienna froze, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. This was intimate, too intimate. You smell like lavender soap and fur, he murmured. And you're telling the truth. He pulled back, running a hand through his dark hair. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold reality of the situation. Someone had tried to assassinate him at the Unity Feast, and they had used a poison that required inside knowledge of the wine selection. What is your name? Sienna. Sienna Brooks. Dominic paused. Brooks. The apothecary's daughter? The one who died in the raids? Yes, she said softly. My father taught me about poisons. Dominic studied her, really looked at her. For the first time, he saw past the grey servant's uniform. He saw the intelligence in her amber eyes, the delicate curve of her jaw, and the way she held herself with a quiet dignity, despite being terrified. You saved my life, Sienna Brooks, he said, the weight of the words hanging in the air. And because of that, your life as you know it is over. Sienna looked up, alarmed. What do you mean? Please, just let me go back to work. I won't tell anyone. You think the people who tried to kill me will let a witness live? Dominic let out a harsh, dry laugh. Elias wasn't working alone. There is a traitor in my inner circle. Someone who knew which wine I would drink. If I send you back to the kitchens, you'll be dead by morning. Sienna felt the blood drain from her face. Then what do I do? Dominic walked to his closet and pulled out a heavy silk robe. He tossed it to her. Clean yourself up, you're staying here. Here? Her voice cracked. In the Alpha's quarters? That's against the laws. I am the law, Dominic growled. He walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds where guards were currently swarming. From this moment on, Sienna, you are not a servant. You are my eyes. And more importantly, he turned back to her, a dangerous glint in his storm-grey eyes. You are my nose. You're going to sniff out every traitor in this pack. And if I refuse? Dominic walked back to her, leaning down until their noses almost touched. The electricity between them was undeniable, a spark that made Sienna's inner wolf lift her head for the first time in years. Then we both die, he whispered, because whoever did this is coming back, and next time they won't use wine. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Enter, Dominic commanded. It wasn't the medic, it was Lady Victoria, the daughter of the neighbouring Alpha and Dominic's rumoured fiancé. She swept in, looking flawless in red silk, but Sienna smelled it instantly, underneath the expensive perfume of roses and vanilla. Burnt almonds. Sienna's eyes widened. She looked at Dominic. She looked at Victoria. She opened her mouth to speak, but Dominic caught her gaze. He gave her a microscopic shake of his head. Don't talk. Dom, darling! Victoria rushed forward, feigning horror. I heard what happened. Are you hurt? She reached out to touch his bare chest. Sienna watched, her breath hitched. The enemy wasn't at the gate. She was in the room. The air in the penthouse bedroom was thick enough to choke on. On one side stood Dominic, the Alpha King, bare-chested and lethal. On the other stood Lady Victoria, a vision of high society beauty in crimson silk. And between them, shrinking into the velvet sofa, was Sienna. Sienna held her breath. The scent of burnt almonds, the signature of the silver ash poison, was wafting off Victoria's skin, mingling sickeningly with her expensive rose perfume. It wasn't strong enough to mean she had drunk it, but it was strong enough to suggest she had handled it. "Dom," Victoria purred, stepping closer, her hand resting possessively on his bicep. "Why is this servant in your private quarters? The guard said she attacked you." Dominic didn't look at Victoria. His eyes were locked on Sienna. He saw the way her nostrils flared slightly, the way her pupils had dilated in terror. He saw the message she was desperately trying to send him without speaking. "She smells like death." Dominic's face remained a mask of stone. He gently, but firmly, removed Victoria's hand from his arm. "She didn't attack me, Victoria. She saved me," Dominic said, his voice flat. "The wine was poisoned." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. The performance was Oscar-worthy. "Poisoned? Oh, goddess, who would do such a thing?" "The northern clans. My father will be furious when he hears. No one is telling your father anything," Dominic cut in, his tone sharp. "This stays in this room. Until I find the traitor, the official story is that the girl tripped and spilled the wine. I don't want the assassin to know they failed. Do you understand?" Victoria blinked, her eyes flashing with a momentary annoyance, before she smoothed her expression. "Of course, darling. Anything you say." "But surely you don't need her here. I can stay. I can watch over you tonight." She stepped closer again, the scent of the poison wafting toward Sienna like a toxic cloud. Sienna couldn't help it. She let out a small, involuntary cough. Victoria's head snapped toward her, her gaze venomous. "Get her some water, or get her out. She sounds diseased." "She stays," Dominic said. "She's the only witness. Jax is guarding the door. You should go, Victoria. It's not safe here." "But go!" Dominic commanded, engaging a fraction of his alpha voice. Victoria stiffened. To refuse a direct command from the Alpha King was to invite a challenge. She forced a tight smile, smoothed her dress, and leaned up to kiss Dominic's cheek. "Be careful, my love," she whispered. As she turned to leave, her eyes raked over Sienna one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The heavy oak door clicked shut. Sienna exhaled in a rush, gasping for fresh air. Dominic was at her side in an instant. "Talk to me. What did you smell?" "Her," Sienna rasped, her voice trembling. "She smells like the wine. Not like she drank it, like she poured it." Dominic's jaw tightened until a muscle ticked in his cheek. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkness. "Victoria," he muttered. "I knew she was ambitious. I didn't think she was stupid." "She's your fiancée?" Sienna asked quietly. "It's a political match," Dominic said, turning back to her. "Her father controls the northern trade routes. If I marry her, the kingdom is united. If I accuse her of attempted regicide without concrete proof, I start a civil war that will kill thousands." He looked at Sienna, his expression grim. "Her scent isn't enough, Sienna. We need physical evidence. We need to know who she's working with. Victoria is pampered. She doesn't know how to synthesize silver ash. Someone made it for her." Sienna stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve hardening. "The server, Elias. He's in the dungeon," Dominic said. "Jax is interrogating him now." "No," Sienna shook her head. "If Victoria was here, she knows he failed. She knows he's a liability." Dominic's eyes widened. "Come with me." He didn't bother with a shirt. He grabbed a trench coat, throwing it over his bare shoulders, and grabbed Sienna's hand. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her arm, warm and grounding. He pulled her out the door, past the startled guards. "To the dungeons!" Dominic barked at Jax. "Now!" They moved through the stone corridors of the Sterling estate, descending deeper underground. The air grew colder, damp and smelling of mildew, but as they approached the holding cells, a new scent hit Sienna. It wasn't mildew, it was bitter almonds and fresh blood. "Stop!" Sienna yanked on Dominic's hand. Dominic halted instantly. "What is it?" "He's already dead," she whispered. Dominic cursed and kicked the dungeon door open. Inside, the guard on duty was slumped in his chair, unconscious. In the cell, Elias the server lay on the cot, foaming at the mouth, his eyes wide and glassy. Dead. Dominic rushed to the bars, gripping them until the metal groaned. "Damn it!" Sienna stepped cautiously into the room. She didn't look at the body. She closed her eyes and inhaled. "Who was here?" Dominic demanded, turning to the unconscious guard. "Wake him up." "No need," Sienna said softly. She walked to a dark corner of the dungeon, near the ventilation shaft. She sniffed the air, tracking the invisible ribbon of scent. "It wasn't Victoria," Sienna said, her brow furrowing. "The scent is different here. It's heavier. Musk, tobacco, and—" She leaned closer to the stone wall. "Expensive leather." "A man?" Dominic asked. "Yes, a powerful one," Sienna confirmed. "But underneath that, there's something else. Something familiar." She walked back to Dominic, looking up at him. "He smells like you." Dominic froze. "Like me?" "Not exactly, but the underlying scent, the blood scent. It's similar to yours." Dominic's face went pale. The implications were catastrophic. If the killer smelled like him, it meant they shared blood. "My brother is dead," Dominic said, his voice low and dangerous. "He died 5 years ago." "I'm just telling you what I smell," Sienna said, shrinking back slightly. Dominic closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, the storm in his grey irises had quieted into a cold, deadly resolve. "My uncle had a son," Dominic said. "Sebastian. He was exiled to the wastelands when I took the throne. If he's back—" He looked at the dead server. "If Sebastian is back, and he's working with Victoria, they aren't just trying to kill me. They're trying to stage a coup." He turned to Sienna. "You are the only one who can identify him. If he's in the castle, you'll smell him." "But I don't know what he looks like," Sienna said. "You don't need to," Dominic replied. He reached out, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. "You just need to breathe." The sun rose over the Sterling estate, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. But inside the castle, the mood was pitch black. Dominic hadn't slept. He had spent the night in the war room with Jax and his most trusted enforcers, locking down the perimeter. Sienna had been moved into the adjoining room to his, a heavily guarded suite usually reserved for queens. She sat on the edge of the massive 4-poster bed, staring at the silk dress laid out for her. It wasn't a servant's uniform. It was a gown of deep midnight blue, elegant and understated. There was a note on top of it in sharp, angular handwriting. "Put this on. Tonight is the emergency council meeting. You are my personal assistant. Stay close." Sienna's hands trembled as she dressed. She was a scullery maid. She washed dishes. She wasn't built for espionage, but every time she thought of running, she remembered the look in Dominic's eyes when he realized his own blood might be hunting him. He looked lonely. She put the dress on. It fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way her uniform never had. She left her hair down, wild waves cascading over her shoulders. When she opened the door, Dominic was waiting. He stopped mid-pace, his eyes widening slightly as he took her in. For a second, the Alpha King looked struck dumb. "You," Dominic cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "You clean up well, Sienna." Sienna flushed. "I feel ridiculous. Everyone will know I don't belong there." "You belong where I say you belong," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave. He stepped closer, offering her his arm. "Stick to my side. If you smell the scent, burnt almonds, tobacco, leather, squeeze my arm. Twice. Do not react. Do not look at the person. Just signal me." "And then what?" "And then I handle it." The council room was a cavernous chamber, dominated by a round table made of ancient oak. 12 seats for the 12 most powerful families in the kingdom. As they entered, the room went silent. All eyes turned to Dominic, and then to the unknown woman on his arm. Alpha Dominic, Elder Silas, a wizened wolf with a white beard, nodded. "We were told there was an incident last night." "An assassination attempt," Dominic corrected, taking his seat at the head of the table. He gestured for Sienna to stand behind his right shoulder. "Beta Elias is dead. Poisoned by his own hand after failing to poison me." Murmurs broke out around the table. "And who is this?" Lady Victoria asked. She was seated across from them, next to her father, Alpha Nordic. She looked flawless, but Sienna could smell the spike of adrenaline in her sweat. "My new personal aide," Dominic said smoothly. "She is taking notes." Victoria narrowed her eyes, but didn't push it. Sienna focused. She closed her eyes for a brief second, inhaling the room. It was a cacophony of scents. Old paper, coffee, cheap cologne, anxiety, greed. She filtered them out, one by one. No almonds on Elder Silas. No almonds on Alpha Nordic. She moved her focus down the table. There was a man sitting in the shadows at the far end. He was wearing a hooded cloak, claiming a photosensitivity condition. He was introduced as a representative from the Western Pax. Sienna inhaled. Leather, tobacco, burnt almonds, and underneath it all, the same metallic blood scent as Dominic. Her heart stopped. It was him. The man from the dungeon. She squeezed Dominic's arm. Once. Twice. Dominic's muscles went rigid under her hand. He didn't look at the hooded man. He continued speaking to Elder Silas. "We believe the threat has been neutralized," Dominic lied, his voice steady. "However, I will be conducting personal interviews with all visiting dignitaries." "Is that necessary?" The hooded man spoke. His voice was raspy, distorted. "Absolutely," Dominic said. He slowly stood up. "Starting with our guest from the west." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The wolves sensed the aggression. "I have nothing to say to you, boy," the hooded man sneered. "I think you do," Dominic said, walking slowly around the table. "I think you have a lot to tell me about my cousin Sebastian." The hooded man stiffened. "Sebastian is dead," the man growled. "Is he?" Dominic stopped 3 feet away. "Then why do you smell like him?" It happened in a blur. The hooded man flipped the table. A hidden blade flashed in the light. "Dominic!" Sienna screamed. But Dominic was ready. He caught the man's wrist in mid-air, twisting it with a sickening crunch. The hood fell back. It wasn't Sebastian, it was Cale, Dominic's beta, his second in command, the man who had stood by his side for 10 years. Sienna gasped. The scent. She had smelled the blood connection because Kyle and Dominic were blood brothers, sworn in a ritual years ago. They shared a blood signature. But the leather and tobacco? That was Cale's signature scent. Cale? Dominic stared at his best friend, betrayal etched into every line of his face. "Why?" Kyle spat in Dominic's face. "Because you're weak, Dominic. You let the northern clans walk all over us. You talk of peace while our borders shrink. Sebastian was a true leader." "So you poisoned me," Dominic roared, throwing Cale across the room. Cale smashed into the stone wall, cracking the masonry. "I did what had to be done," Kyle shouted, his eyes glowing yellow. "And I'm not alone." Suddenly, the lights in the council room died. "Get down!" Dominic shouted, diving back toward Sienna. Window glass shattered as canisters were thrown into the room. Smoke grenades, thick purple smoke filled the air instantly. Wolfsbane gas. Sienna coughed, her lungs burning. She couldn't see. She couldn't breathe. "Sienna!" Dominic's voice was lost in the chaos. She felt a hand grab her arm. Not Dominic's hand. This one was smaller, colder, long fingernails dug into her flesh. "You possess a very annoying talent, little mouse," a woman's voice whispered in her ear. "Victoria." Sienna tried to scream, but a cloth soaked in chloroform was pressed against her face. "Don't worry," Victoria hissed. "We aren't going to kill you yet. Sebastian wants to meet the girl who ruined his plan." Sienna's vision blurred. The last thing she heard was the sound of Dominic's roar, a sound of pure, feral rage tearing through the smoke. "Sienna!" Then darkness took her. The world came back to Sienna in a rush of pain and nausea. Her head throbbed, a rhythmic pounding behind her eyes that synced with the sound of dripping water. Drip, drip, drip. She tried to move her hands, but they were bound tight behind her back with zip ties that bit into her skin. The surface beneath her was cold, unforgiving concrete. She opened her eyes. It was dim, lit only by a flickering fluorescent bulb buzzing angrily overhead. The air tasted stale, recycled. But her nose told her exactly where she was. She smelled sulfur, pine needles, old snow, and the unmistakable metallic tang of rusted iron and industrial waste. The wastelands. She was miles from the Sterling estate. Maybe hundreds of miles. This was the lawless territory beyond the pack borders, a place where exiles and rogues went to rot. "She's awake," a voice sneered from the corner. Sienna flinched. The scent hit her first, roses and venom. Victoria. Lady Victoria stepped into the light, her pristine red dress now replaced by practical tactical gear, though she still wore her diamond earrings. She looked out of place in the grime of the bunker, like a porcelain doll in a landfill. "You really are a resilient little pest," Victoria said, crossing her arms. "Most Omegas would be comatose after that much chloroform." Sienna pushed herself up to a sitting position, fighting the dizziness. "Where is the king?" Victoria laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "The king? You mean the corpse? Dominic is likely dead by now. Cale was quite thorough with the gas grenades. Or, if he survived, he's tearing the countryside apart looking for you, which is exactly what Sebastian wants. A mad alpha is a careless alpha." "Sebastian," Sienna whispered. "You called?" The heavy steel door at the far end of the room groaned open. A man stepped in. He was tall, with the same broad shoulders and dark hair as Dominic, but where Dominic was marble, smooth, hard, perfect, this man was granite. Rough, weathered. A jagged scar ran from his left eye down to his jaw, pulling his lip into a permanent, cynical smirk. He smelled of the deep woods, blood, and power. But unlike Dominic's power, which felt like a storm, Sebastian's felt like a void, a black hole that swallowed everything around it. "So this is the nose," Sebastian said, walking toward her. He didn't look at Victoria. His eyes, a pale, icy blue, were fixed on Sienna. He crouched down in front of her. "I have to admit, I didn't believe Kyle. He said a kitchen girl smelled the silver ash from 20 feet away. I told him he was hallucinating." Sebastian reached out, grabbing her chin with calloused fingers. "But then, you smelled Cale's blood allegiance, didn't you? That's a trick even the High Elders can't do." Sienna pulled her face away, glaring at him. "You're a traitor. Dominic spared you. He exiled you instead of killing you." "Spared me?" Sebastian stood up, his voice rising. "He stole my birthright. My father was the elder brother. The throne was mine. Dominic took it because he was more stable, more diplomatic. He paced the small room. Diplomacy is a disease. It makes us weak. Look at the North. They encroach on our lands, and Dominic invites them to dinner. I would have sent their heads back in boxes. So you poisoned him, Sienna said, finding her voice. Coward's work. Sebastian stopped. He turned slowly. The air in the room grew heavy, the pressure of his alpha aura crushing down on her. It was strategy, he hissed, and it failed because of you, which brings us to why you are still breathing. He gestured to Victoria, who handed him a small vial. We have plenty of silver ash, Sebastian said, swirling the liquid. But we are developing something new, something volatile. We need to test the potency, and since you have such a refined palate— Sienna's blood ran cold. You want me to be a lab rat? I want you to be a quality control inspector, Sebastian smiled chillingly. If you can smell the poison in the water supply before the rest of the pack does, we know the dosage is too high. If you can't, well, then we know it's perfect. I won't help you, Sienna said. Oh, you will, Victoria piped up, stepping forward with a cruel grin. Because if you don't, we'll start sending pieces of you to Dominic. A finger here, an ear there. Boom! The entire bunker shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The light flickered and died, plunging them into darkness before the red emergency lights bathed the room in blood-colored hues. Sebastian's head snapped toward the door. What was that? Another explosion rocked the foundation, closer this time. The sound of tearing metal screeched through the walls. Sienna inhaled sharply. Through the concrete, through the rust, through the fear. She smelled it. Rain, ozone, and sheer, unadulterated fury. He's here, Sienna whispered, a smile touching her lips despite the terror. Sebastian roared. Positions! Kyle, get the perimeter! He grabbed Sienna by her hair, hauling her to her feet. She cried out, stumbling. If he wants you so badly, Sebastian snarled, pulling a knife and pressing it to her throat, he can come and get you. Meanwhile, outside the bunker, Dominic Sterling was no longer a king in a suit. He was a force of nature. He had shifted halfway, his claws extended, his eyes glowing a luminous, terrifying violet. The mark of an apex alpha pushed to the brink. He didn't need a map. He didn't need a tracker. The moment they took her, a tether had snapped into place in his chest. It was an ancient bond, one written in the old laws of the wolves. Mate. He hadn't realized it until she was gone. But now, feeling her terror vibrate through the bond, he knew he would burn the world to ash to get her back. Alpha! Jax shouted over the comms. The main blast doors are breached, but they have hostages. We detect heat signatures in the lower levels. Kill everyone armed, Dominic growled into his headset, his voice a distorted rumble. Leave Sebastian to me. And Lady Victoria? Dominic ripped the steel door of the bunker off its hinges with one hand, tossing it aside like cardboard. If she stands in my way, Dominic said, stepping into the darkness, tear her apart. He moved through the corridors like a wraith. The rogue wolves guarding the hallway didn't stand a chance. Dominic didn't even slow down. A swipe of his claws, the snap of bone, and he was moving past their falling bodies. He followed the scent. Lavender. Fear. Sienna. He reached the central chamber. The door was locked, reinforced steel. Dominic didn't bother with the keypad. He stepped back, channeled every ounce of rage into his shoulder, and slammed into the metal. With a deafening crunch, the door buckled. A second hit, and it flew inward. Dominic stalked into the room, his chest heaving. The scene before him froze his heart. Sebastian stood in the center of the room, holding Sienna like a shield. The knife was pressed so hard against her neck that a thin line of blood was already trickling down her pale skin. Victoria stood behind them, holding a handgun with shaking hands. "One step!" Sebastian screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "One step closer, cousin, and I open her throat!" Dominic stopped. He went deadly still. The violet glow in his eyes dimmed to a stormy grey, but the intensity didn't waver. "Let her go, Sebastian," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And I will grant you a quick death." "I don't want your mercy," Sebastian spat. "I want your crown." "You can have it," Dominic said, dropping his hands to his sides. "Take the kingdom. Take the title. Just give me the girl." Sienna's eyes widened. She stared at Dominic. He was trading a kingdom for a scullery maid. "Liar!" Victoria shrieked. "He's lying, Sebastian. Shoot him!" "Shut up!" Sebastian yelled at her. The distraction was microscopic, but it was enough. Sienna inhaled. She smelled the adrenaline spiking in Sebastian. She smelled the sweat on his palm, making the knife handle slippery. And she smelled something else. A gas line running through the wall behind Sebastian, ruptured by the earlier explosion. It was faint, odorless to them. But to her, it smelled like rotten eggs and death. She looked at Dominic. She couldn't speak freely. But she saw him watching her nose. She took a deep breath, exaggerated and loud. She flared her nostrils, then she looked directly at the wall behind Sebastian and scrunched her nose. Gas. Dominic understood. He didn't look at the wall. He kept his eyes on Sebastian. "You're right, Sebastian," Dominic said, raising his voice. "I am weak." He secretly signaled Jax on the comms. "Ignite." "But I'm not stupid." Dominic dropped to the floor. "Cover your ears," he roared. Jax, positioned outside the ventilation shaft, threw a flashbang grenade into the ruptured vent. The spark met the leaking gas. The wall behind Sebastian exploded outward. It wasn't a firestorm, but the concussive force was brutal. Concrete and rebar rained down. Sebastian was thrown forward by the blast, losing his grip on Sienna. The knife skittered across the floor. Sienna was knocked sideways, hitting the ground hard. "No!" Sebastian screamed, scrambling to his feet, blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. He lunged for the knife, but Dominic was faster. He was a blur of motion. He tackled Sebastian mid-air, slamming him into the far wall with enough force to crack the foundation. "You touched her!" Dominic snarled, punctuating every word with a blow to Sebastian's face. "You touched her." It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Sebastian, for all his talk of strength, was no match for a prime alpha fueled by the mate bond. Dominic broke Sebastian's arm, then his ribs. Across the room, Victoria saw the tide turn. She panicked. She raised the gun, aiming not at Dominic, but at Sienna, who was struggling to stand. "If I can't be queen," Victoria screamed, her face twisted into a mask of madness, "no one will." Sienna froze. She was looking down the barrel of the gun. Time seemed to slow. She could smell the gunpowder. She could smell Victoria's finger tightening on the trigger. She didn't have time to run. But suddenly, a shadow eclipsed her. A body slammed into her, knocking her flat just as the gun went off. Bang! Sienna squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the pain. But it didn't come. She opened her eyes. Cale was lying on top of her. The traitorous Beta let out a wet cough. Blood bloomed on the back of his tactical vest. He had taken the bullet meant for her. Sienna gasped, pushing him off. Kyle rolled onto his back, wheezing. "Why?" she whispered, staring at him. "You wanted me dead." Kyle looked at her, his eyes fading. He looked past her, at Dominic, who had frozen mid-punch, staring at his fallen friend. Kyle choked out. "I wanted a strong pack, not..." A monster! He looked at Sebastian, who was broken and pathetic in the corner. Then he looked at Dominic. I chose wrong. Kyle exhaled, a long, rattling breath. And then he was gone. Dominic let Sebastian's limp body drop to the floor. He turned slowly toward Victoria. Victoria dropped the gun. She backed away, her hands trembling. Dom, please, he forced me. Sebastian forced me. I love you. Dominic walked toward her. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked, and the silence was louder than any roar. He stopped in front of her. He leaned down, picking up the gun she had dropped. He unloaded the clip and tossed the weapon aside. You don't love me, Victoria, Dominic said softly. You love the crown, and you will never, ever wear it. Guards rushed into the room, weapons raised. Get her out of my sight, Dominic commanded. To the dungeons. She stands trial for treason at dawn. As they dragged a screaming Victoria away, Dominic turned. The rage drained out of him instantly. His shoulders slumped. He looked across the debris-strewn room at Sienna. She was covered in dust, bruising already forming on her neck, her dress torn. Sienna, he breathed. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, falling to his knees before her. He didn't care about the dirt. He didn't care about his rank. He reached out, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her in case she shattered. Is anything broken? He asked, his voice frantic. Sienna shook her head. She looked at the bruises on his knuckles, the blood on his shirt. You came, she whispered. You actually came. I would have torn down the sky, Dominic said intensely. He gently touched the cut on her neck where the knife had been. His eyes darkened with regret. I let this happen. I put you in danger. You didn't, Sienna said. She reached out, her small hand covering his large, battered one. I chose to help. I chose to speak. Dominic looked into her amber eyes. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. He took a deep inhale, filling his lungs with her scent. Lavender, rain, and home. I can't go back to the way it was, Sienna, he murmured against her skin. I can't send you back to the kitchen. I can't let you be invisible. I don't want to be invisible anymore, she replied softly. Dominic pulled back, looking at her with a raw vulnerability that no one in the kingdom had ever seen. Then don't be, he said. Be mine. 3 months later. The grand hall of the Sterling estate was full again, but the atmosphere was different. The tension was gone. The northern banners hung side by side with the Sterling crest, a peace treaty signed not by marriage, but by trade and mutual respect, negotiated by the new Alpha King. And at the high table, there was no Lady Victoria. Dominic sat at the head, looking regal and commanding. But his chair was shifted slightly to the right, making room for another chair beside him. Sienna sat there. She wasn't wearing a crown, not yet, but she wore a gown of shimmering silver. She held her head high. She wasn't just the king's mate, she was his advisor, his shadow, his sense. The waiters moved through the room pouring wine. A young server, nervous and shaking, approached the high table with a bottle of vintage red. He fumbled, nearly dropping the bottle. He looked terrified, waiting for the Alpha to yell. Dominic didn't move. He just looked at Sienna. Sienna leaned forward slightly. She inhaled. She smelled the grapes, the oak barrel, the yeast, and the nervous sweat of a boy who was just trying to do his job. She smiled at the server. It's perfect, Sienna said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the silent hall. Pour. The boy poured the wine with a sigh of relief. Dominic took his glass, but he didn't drink. He turned to Sienna, raising the goblet in a toast. The entire hall went silent, watching. To the voice that saved the kingdom, Dominic said, his eyes locked on hers. Sienna raised her glass, her cheeks flushing pink. To the wolf who listened, she replied. They clinked glasses. The sound rang out like a bell. Dominic leaned in, under the cover of the applause that erupted around them. He brushed his lips against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Tonight," he whispered, his voice a low, seductive growl. "I don't want to talk either." Sienna smiled, inhaling the scent of her mate, winter, storm, and love. "Good," she whispered back. And as the Alpha King kissed the Omega who saved his life, the entire pack howled in celebration, a sound that shook the very foundations of the earth. And that, my friends, is the legend of Sienna Brooks and Alpha Dominic. From the scullery maid, who was invisible to the queen, who saved a dynasty, all because she dared to break her silence. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We all have superpowers that the world might see as weaknesses. Sienna's sensitivity was her curse until it became her greatest weapon. What is your hidden strength? And more importantly, do you think Cale deserved redemption in the end? He died saving her, but he started the whole war. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Was Kyle a villain or a victim? If this story made your heart race, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. And if you want more werewolf romances, twists, and forbidden love stories, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, keep your senses sharp. You never know who's really listening.